The scream that tore from my throat wasn't mine. It belonged to someone I didn't recognize anymore, someone who'd finally seen the truth written in the cold calculation behind his eyes as he said, "Those properties should really be in both our names, don't you think?" The lawyer's office felt too small, the air too thick, and I remember thinking how strange it was that betrayal could taste metallic, like blood in your mouth after biting your tongue. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 3 months earlier, to a woman who still believed love meant sacrifice, who still thought marriage was supposed to feel like walking on eggshells. I was sitting in my favorite armchair in our Phoenix home, the one by the window that caught the afternoon light just right. The funeral had been that morning. My Aunt Clara, the woman who'd raised me after my parents died, who'd built a small real estate empire from nothing, who'd promised me I'd never have to worry about money again. The grief sat heavy in my chest, but there was also this strange lightness, this knowledge that she'd thought of me, that I mattered enough to inherit 26 rental properties scattered across 3 states. 26. The number felt impossible in my mouth when I said it out loud at dinner that night. Marcus had suggested we go to our favorite Italian place, the one with the red brick walls and candlelight that made everything feel romantic. He'd been so attentive all day, holding my hand during the service, making sure I ate something at the reception. I thought he was being supportive. I was so stupid. We were halfway through our pasta when I mentioned it, almost casually, like it was just another piece of grief to process. The lawyer called today. Aunt Clara left me her properties, all 26 of them. I watched his face change. It was subtle, like watching ice form on a window, but I caught it. His eyes went sharp for just a second before that familiar warm smile slid back into place. "That's incredible, honey. She really loved you." But his voice had an edge I'd never noticed before, or maybe I had and just convinced myself I'd imagined it. "We should sit down with a financial advisor, make sure everything's set up properly. For us. Us." The word hung in the air between the breadsticks and wine glasses. Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle, but I pushed the feeling down. This was Marcus, my husband of 8 years, the man who'd courted me with poetry and patience, who'd convinced me that my independence was actually just fear of commitment. I smiled and nodded, ignoring the voice in my head that whispered danger. "You're probably wondering how I got here, how a woman in her mid-50s who'd survived losing her parents, who'd built a career as a high school English teacher, who prided herself on being nobody's fool, ended up in this position. But that's the thing about manipulation. It doesn't announce itself. It seeps in through the cracks, disguised as love, as concern, as partnership." The next morning, I woke up to find Marcus already dressed, sitting at our kitchen table with his laptop open and a stack of papers spread out in front of him. "I've been doing some research," he said, not looking up. "We really should transfer those properties into a joint trust. It's the smart thing to do for tax purposes. I made us an appointment with my lawyer for Friday." His lawyer, not our lawyer, his. But I didn't catch that detail then. I was too busy feeling grateful that he was taking charge, that I didn't have to navigate this complicated inheritance alone. "That sounds good," I heard myself say, pouring coffee into the mug he'd already set out for me. The gesture felt thoughtful. Now I know it was calculated, another brick in the wall he was building around me. That week, I started noticing things I'd trained myself not to see. The way he'd answer questions I hadn't asked, anticipating my needs before I could voice them. The way he'd steer conversations, gently redirecting me whenever I expressed an opinion that differed from his. "You know, honey, I think what you really mean is..." He'd start sentences like that, reframing my thoughts until they matched his vision of reality. I found myself second-guessing every instinct, every feeling, every memory of what I'd actually said or done. Is this ringing any bells for you? Have you ever felt like you're losing your grip on your own mind? Like the person who's supposed to love you most is slowly convincing you that up is down and down is up? That's what psychological manipulation feels like. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one small enough to dismiss, but together they bleed you dry. And the statistics are staggering. Research shows that psychological abuse is the most common form of domestic abuse, affecting anywhere from 28 to 62% of victims. 28 to 62%. Let that sink in for a moment. I'd become an expert at dismissing my own discomfort. When Marcus suggested I quit my teaching job to focus on managing the properties, I told myself he was being practical. When he insisted I add him to my bank accounts for convenience, I thought he was being helpful. When he started screening my calls, saying he didn't want me stressed by solicitors and scammers, I believed he was protecting me. Each concession felt small in the moment, reasonable even. But they were adding up, and I was disappearing. By the end of that month, I'd signed papers I didn't fully understand, made changes to accounts I'd held for 30 years, and started asking permission for things I'd never needed permission for before. "Do you think I should go to book club tonight?" I'd ask. "Should I call my friend Linda back? Is it okay if I buy this sweater?" When did I become this person? When did my autonomy become something I handed over like loose change? The Friday appointment with his lawyer came too fast. I remember walking into that glass tower downtown, feeling small and out of place in my teacher clothes, while Marcus strode in wearing his confidence like armor. He worked in commercial real estate, had for 20 years, and he navigated these spaces like he owned them. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, spread documents across the conference table. "So you want to establish a joint revocable trust for the inherited properties," she said, not really asking. I opened my mouth to respond, but Marcus spoke first. "That's right. We want everything protected, everything fair. Right, honey?" He squeezed my hand, and I felt the pressure of his expectation. I nodded. I signed where she pointed. I smiled when she said congratulations. And I ignored the screaming in my head that told me I was making a terrible mistake. That night, lying in bed next to him, I felt the walls closing in. My heart was racing, my chest tight, and I couldn't figure out why. On paper, everything looked fine. Better than fine. I was married to a successful man who was helping me manage a windfall inheritance. I should have been grateful, relieved, happy. Instead, I felt like I was suffocating. The weeks that followed felt like watching myself from outside my body. Marcus took over everything. He hired a property management company, consolidated the rental income into an account he controlled, started talking about our investment strategy. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with this gnawing feeling in my gut, this sense that something fundamental had shifted, but I couldn't name it, couldn't point to any single thing he'd done wrong. He was attentive, affectionate, always had an explanation that made sense. But I was losing myself, and I didn't know how to stop it. I started pulling away from my friends without even realizing it. Linda would call to invite me to lunch, and I'd make excuses. My colleague Rachel would ask me to join her for after-work drinks, and I'd say I was too tired. It wasn't that Marcus forbade me from seeing them. He was too smart for that. He'd just ask pointed questions afterward. "What did you tell Linda about us? Did Rachel ask about money again? You know your friends don't really understand what we're building here." Slowly, subtly, he made every social interaction feel like a potential betrayal until it was easier just to stay home. One afternoon in late autumn, I found myself standing in my classroom after school, looking at the empty desks, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. I'd given up this job, the thing that had defined me for 30 years. And for what? To manage properties I no longer controlled. To be available whenever Marcus needed me? A student's essay was still on my desk, a beautiful analysis of how power dynamics work in relationships, how one person can slowly dominate another through seemingly benign gestures. I picked it up and started reading, and it was like looking into a mirror I'd been avoiding for months. The essay talked about something called coercive control, how it operates through isolation, through controlling resources, through making the victim doubt their own reality. I felt my hands start to shake. This was my life. This was what was happening to me. But even as I recognized it, even as every word on that page confirmed what some deep part of me already knew. I couldn't quite believe it. This was Marcus, my husband, the man who'd pursued me with such intensity, who'd made me feel chosen, special, protected. He couldn't be. He wouldn't. I drove home that evening in a fog, my mind racing and blank at the same time. When I walked in, Marcus was in the kitchen preparing dinner, humming to himself. He looked up and smiled, that smile that had once made me feel safe, and now made me feel trapped. "How was your day, honey?" he asked, as if everything was normal, as if I hadn't just had my entire reality shattered by a teenager's essay. I heard myself say, "Fine," and felt a piece of my soul die. Because that's what you do when you're being controlled, isn't it? You go along. You pretend. You tell yourself maybe you're wrong. Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe love is supposed to feel like this. You gaslight yourself because accepting the truth is too terrifying, too world-ending. So you smile and you eat the dinner he prepared and you let him talk about his day, about the clients he impressed, about the deal he's closing, and you die a little more inside. Have you ever doubted your own sanity? Have you ever been so thoroughly convinced that your reality was wrong that you started to lose faith in your own mind? That's where I was. That's the prison psychological abuse builds, a cell made entirely of your own confusion and self-doubt. And the worst part? The absolute worst part? I was an educated woman. I'd read about this. I'd counseled students through abusive relationships. I'd judged women who stayed, wondering why they didn't just leave. Now I was one of them, and I understood. You don't just leave. You can't just leave. Because first, you have to find yourself again, and he's spent so much time convincing you that you don't exist without him. That night, after Marcus fell asleep, I sat in my bathroom with my phone, Googling phrases I was ashamed to search. Am I being manipulated? Signs of financial abuse. How to know if you're in an unhealthy relationship. Every article I read felt like it had been written specifically about my life. Every checklist item had a check mark. And with each confirmation came this sickening realization that I'd handed over everything. My inheritance, my financial security, my very identity. I'd given it all to a man who'd seen my vulnerability after Aunt Clara's death and decided to exploit it. The statistics I found that night made me feel less alone and more terrified at the same time. Did you know that of victims who return after leaving abusive situations, 97% return multiple times before finally breaking free? 97%. I wasn't even at the leaving stage yet. I was still in the "is this really happening" stage, the "maybe I'm crazy" stage, the "how did I get here" stage. But those numbers told me something important. They told me that whatever happened next, I had to be ready to see it through, because going back, doubting myself again, would only make it harder to escape. I stayed up until dawn that morning, reading and researching and slowly, painfully accepting the truth. My husband didn't love me. My husband was using me. My husband had seen 26 properties and decided they should be his. And I'd been so grateful for his attention, so desperate not to be alone in my grief, that I'd let him do it. The sun rose over Phoenix, painting the desert sky pink and gold, and I felt something shift inside me. Grief, yes. Rage, definitely. But also clarity. Finally, after months of fog, I could see clearly. And what I saw was a woman who'd sacrificed everything and gotten nothing in return except the illusion of partnership. The autonomy I'd given up wasn't just about bank accounts and property deeds. It was about my thoughts, my time, my friendships, my work, my very sense of self. Marcus had systematically dismantled everything that made me who I was, and he'd done it so smoothly that I'd thanked him for it. That's the genius of this kind of manipulation. It doesn't look like abuse from the outside. It looks like a devoted husband taking care of his grieving wife. It looks like partnership, like teamwork, like love. But love doesn't ask you to disappear. Love doesn't require you to doubt yourself. Love doesn't take everything and give nothing back. I knew that intellectually. I'd taught it to my students. But knowing something in your head and knowing it in your bones are two different things. That morning, watching the sunrise alone while my husband slept peacefully beside me, I finally knew it in my bones. And once you know something like that, really know it, you can't unknow it. You can only decide what you're going to do about it. I thought about Aunt Clara, about how she'd built her empire from nothing, how she'd never let anyone make her small. She'd survived the death of her husband, raised me when my parents died, and still found a way to thrive. She'd left me those properties not just as financial security, but as a legacy of independence, of strength, of refusal to be diminished. And I dishonored that legacy by handing it over to a man who saw it as his windfall, not mine. That realization hurt worse than anything else, worse than the betrayal, worse than the manipulation. I'd betrayed myself, and I'd betrayed her memory. But Aunt Clara had also taught me something else. She taught me that it's never too late to fight back, that women are stronger than we're told, that money is power, and power is worth protecting. I could hear her voice in my head, sharp and clear. Don't you dare let some smooth-talking man take what I built for you. And in that moment, sitting in my bathroom at dawn, I made a decision. I was going to get it back, all of it. My properties, my money, my mind, my life. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I was done disappearing. Looking back now, I realized that morning was my breaking point, not the dramatic kind you see in movies, with screaming and throwing things. Just a quiet internal collapse, where the structure of denial I'd been holding up finally crumbled, and I had to face what was underneath. The truth. The ugly, devastating, liberating truth. And once you've seen that truth, there's no going back to pretending. There's only forward into whatever comes next, even if what comes next is terrifying. I spent the next week moving through my days like a ghost, smiling when expected, agreeing when prompted, all while my mind raced with plans I didn't know how to execute. Marcus noticed nothing. Why would he? I'd trained him to expect compliance. Every morning, he'd outline our schedule, our finances, our plans, and every morning I'd nod along, hiding the rebellion growing inside me. I felt like a spy in my own life, gathering intelligence, looking for weaknesses in the fortress he'd built around me. It started with small acts of defiance that he couldn't see. I began keeping a journal, hidden in the lining of my winter coat in the back of the closet. I wrote down everything. Every time he answered a question I hadn't asked, every time he told me what I really meant, every time he made a decision about my inheritance without consulting me. The pattern became impossible to ignore once I saw it written down, page after page of control disguised as care. Then I did something I'm not proud of, but I'm not ashamed of either. I started recording our conversations. Just audio, on my phone, hidden in my pocket or purse. I needed proof, not for a court, maybe not even for anyone else, but for myself. For those inevitable moments when I'd doubt again, when he'd convince me I was remembering wrong, when I'd question whether it was really as bad as I thought. I needed his own words, preserved, undeniable. The first recording I listened to back nearly broke me. His voice, so reasonable, so concerned, systematically taking apart my objection to some financial decision I can't even remember now. Honey, I think you're getting emotional about this. Let's look at the facts. Then he'd lay out facts that weren't quite true, twist numbers until they supported his conclusion, all while sounding so logical, so patient. Listening to it, hearing how easily he manipulated reality, I felt sick. But I also felt validated. It was real. It was happening. I wasn't crazy. One recording in particular stands out. We were discussing whether I should reach out to the property management company directly, and I'll never forget his words. You know you're not good with these things. That's why you have me. I don't want you stressed out trying to understand commercial leases and tenant issues. Just let me handle it. The condescension dripped through every syllable. The assumption that I was incompetent, that I needed protecting from my own inheritance. That's when I heard it, really heard it. The disdain underneath the concern. He didn't think I was capable. Or maybe he did, And that was worse, because it meant he was deliberately keeping me dependent. I think about that moment now, and I wonder how many of you listening have heard something similar. Maybe not about properties, but about your job, your friends, your family, your money. That voice that tells you you're not capable, that you need protection, that you should just let someone else handle the complicated stuff. It's insidious because it sounds like love. It sounds like someone caring enough to shield you from difficulty. But really, it's someone who wants you weak, who needs you dependent, who's threatened by your competence. Around this time, I started reconnecting with Linda, my oldest friend, who I'd been avoiding for months. I was scared Marcus would notice, would interrogate me about it, but I was more scared of disappearing completely. Linda and I met for coffee at a place across town, somewhere I knew Marcus would never go. The moment I saw her, something inside me cracked. She took one look at my face and said, "What did he do to you?" Not, "What's wrong?" or "Are you okay?" but, "What did he do?" Like she already knew, like it was obvious to everyone but me. I didn't tell her everything that day. I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat, heavy with shame. But I told her enough. About the properties, about how quickly I'd signed everything over, about how small I felt in my own life. Linda didn't judge. She didn't say, "I told you so," even though she'd had reservations about Marcus from the beginning, reservations I'd dismissed as jealousy or misunderstanding. She just listened, and then she said something that changed everything. "You need to talk to someone who understands this better than I do, someone who sees this kind of thing all the time." That someone turned out to be Sister Margaret at the church Linda attended, a spiritual counselor who'd worked with abuse survivors for 30 years. I was skeptical at first. I'm not particularly religious, and the idea of discussing my marriage with a nun felt strange. Outdated even. But Linda insisted, and I was desperate enough to try anything. The following Tuesday, I found myself in a small office at the church, sitting across from a woman in her 70s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Sister Margaret didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Tell me what brought you here," she said, and I did. I told her everything, the whole sordid story spilling out of me like a confession. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and I braced myself for platitudes about marriage being work, about forgiveness, about prayer. Instead, she leaned forward and said, "You know what he's doing is wrong. You know he's abusing you. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The directness shocked me. No hemming and hawing, no gentle suggestions, just plain truth. And it was the truth that finally set something free in me. "I don't know," I admitted. "I feel trapped. He has control of everything now." "Does he, though?" Sister Margaret asked. "Or does he just have control of what you've given him? Because last I checked, you're not dead. You can still make decisions. You can still fight back. It won't be easy, and it won't be pretty, but you're not powerless. You're just scared, and that's okay. Fear is normal, but don't confuse it with inability." Her words lodged in my chest like seeds waiting to sprout. You're just scared. You're not powerless. Over the following weeks, I met with Sister Margaret twice more, and each time she helped me see my situation more clearly. She didn't tell me what to do. She asked questions that forced me to think, to plan, to remember who I was before Marcus. "What did you love about teaching?" she'd ask. "What made you feel strong? When was the last time you made a decision without considering what he'd think?" Through those conversations, I began to reclaim pieces of myself I'd thought were gone forever. The woman who'd stood in front of rowdy teenagers and commanded respect. The woman who'd negotiated her salary, managed her own investments, traveled alone to conferences. That woman was still in there, buried under months of manipulation and self-doubt. Sister Margaret helped me excavate her, and with each session I felt a little more solid, a little more real. But knowledge and strength aren't the same as action, and I still didn't know what to do. I had recordings of his manipulation, journal entries documenting the pattern, and a growing sense of righteous anger. But I also had legal documents with my signature on them, documents that gave him access to everything. I'd willingly handed over my inheritance, and now I needed to figure out how to get it back. The problem was, I had no idea where to start. That's when Sister Margaret suggested something that seemed crazy at first. "What if," she said during our 4th meeting, "you stopped trying to fight him head-on and started documenting everything instead? What if you became very, very interested in understanding exactly what he's done with your properties? Not to confront him, not yet, just to know. Knowledge is power, and right now, he has it all." She was right. I'd been so focused on my emotional state, on recognizing the abuse, that I hadn't thought strategically about the practical reality. Marcus had my properties, yes, but he also had to manage them, report on them, account for them. There would be a paper trail, financial records, rental agreements, property tax documents, bank statements. All I had to do was access them. All I had to do was become curious about the empire I supposedly owned. So I did. I started asking questions, but carefully, framed as interest rather than suspicion. "Honey, I was thinking about those properties. How are they doing?" "I'd love to understand more about the rental income. Could you show me the statements?" At first, he was thrilled by my supposed interest, eager to explain how well he was managing everything. But as my questions got more specific, more detailed, I noticed his enthusiasm wane. He started deflecting, changing subjects, promising to show me later. That resistance told me everything I needed to know. If everything was above board, he'd have no reason to hide the details. But he was hiding something, and I was going to find out what. One afternoon while he was at work, I went through his home office, carefully photographing documents, copying files from his computer onto a flash drive I kept hidden in my tampon box. I felt like a criminal in my own home, but I also felt alive in a way I hadn't in months. I was doing something. I was fighting back. What I found in those files made me physically ill. He'd been systematically draining the rental income from my properties into accounts I didn't have access to. He'd taken out loans against some of them without my knowledge, using the money for his own investments. He'd even sold 3 of the properties, forging my signature on the documents, pocketing hundreds of thousands of dollars. The trust we'd set up wasn't protecting me. It was providing him legal cover for theft. I sat on my bathroom floor with printouts spread around me, hyperventilating, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd done. This wasn't just manipulation. This wasn't just control. This was fraud. This was theft. This was criminal. And I'd enabled it by trusting him, by signing without reading, by believing that marriage meant merging everything. Aunt Clara's legacy, the security she'd worked her whole life to build for me, was being stolen, and I'd held the door open for the thief. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay next to Marcus, listening to him breathe, wondering how I'd ever thought this man loved me. How I'd convinced myself his interest in my inheritance was natural concern rather than calculated greed. I thought about confronting him right then, screaming accusations, demanding answers. But Sister Margaret's voice echoed in my head. "Knowledge is power, but timing is everything. Don't show your hand until you know exactly what move you're making next." So I waited. I pretended. I smiled at breakfast and asked about his day and acted like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I'd seen the evidence of his betrayal in black and white, and I was done being a victim. I was done disappearing. I was done making myself small to accommodate his theft. The woman Aunt Clara had raised, the woman I'd been before grief and loneliness made me vulnerable, that woman was waking up. And she was furious. The next week, I contacted a lawyer. Not his lawyer, not the woman who'd helped set up the trust, but someone Linda recommended, someone who specialized in financial abuse and fraud. Her name was Elena Rodriguez, and she had a reputation for being brilliant and ruthless. I needed both. In her office, I laid out everything. The recordings, the journal entries, the financial documents I'd copied, the timeline of how quickly he'd gained control after Aunt Clara died. She listened without interrupting, taking notes, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, Elena was quiet for a moment, then said, "This is bad, but it's also good because you have documentation. A lot of people in your situation have nothing but their word against their abusers. You've been smart, keeping records. That's going to save you." She paused, then added, "But I need to be honest with you. This is going to get ugly. He's committed fraud, possibly on a scale that could involve criminal charges. When we move against him, he's going to fight back hard. He'll try to convince you you're wrong, that you misunderstood, that you're being vindictive. He might threaten you. Are you prepared for that?" Was I prepared? I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. The woman who'd signed away her inheritance without reading the fine print. That woman wasn't prepared for anything, but I wasn't her anymore. "Yes," I heard myself say. "I'm prepared. Tell me what we need to do." Elena's plan was methodical and brilliant. First, we'd secure the assets, freezing accounts and filing emergency motions to prevent him from disposing of any more properties. Then, we'd gather additional evidence, potentially involving forensic accountants to trace every dollar. Finally, we'd confront him with everything at once, not giving him time to manufacture explanations or hide more evidence. "The key," Elena explained, "is that he can't know you know. Not until we're ready. Can you keep pretending?" I thought about all the months I'd spent pretending I was happy, pretending I didn't notice his control, pretending love was supposed to feel like suffocation. Pretending had become second nature. "I can do that," I assured her. And I did. For 3 more weeks, I played the role of oblivious wife, while behind the scenes, Elena built our case. I smiled when he announced he was selling another property, thanking him for handling the complicated details. I didn't argue when he decided we needed to refinance our home to invest in his latest business venture. I just nodded and signed where he indicated, knowing Elena had already filed motions that would make those documents meaningless. During this time, I also made copies of everything I could access. Every bank statement, every property document, every email between Marcus and his business associates. I created digital and physical backups, storing them in places he'd never think to look. Linda's house, Sister Margaret's office, a safe deposit box I opened at a bank across town. I became paranoid about covering my tracks, clearing browser histories, using private windows, making sure my lawyer's calls came through Linda's phone instead of mine. The weight of the deception was exhausting. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. Every smile felt like a mask that might slip. There were moments I wanted to scream, to confront him, to stop pretending. But then I'd remember Aunt Clara, remember the 26 properties she'd built, remember that I was fighting not just for myself, but for her legacy. That kept me going when my courage faltered. One evening, about 2 weeks into this elaborate charade, Marcus came home excited about a new investment opportunity. Some commercial property in downtown Phoenix that was about to go on the market, a can't-miss deal that required quick capital. "I think we should sell 5 more of your aunt's properties to finance it," he said over dinner, as casual as discussing the weather. "The ROI will be incredible." I looked at him across the table. This man I'd once loved. This man who was so confident in his control over me that he wasn't even pretending to ask anymore. He was telling me what we'd do with my inheritance, expecting no resistance. The audacity of it stole my breath, but I swallowed my rage and said, "That sounds smart. You know best about these things." His smile was triumphant, satisfied. He thought he'd won. What he didn't know was that every word of that conversation was being recorded. What he didn't know was that Elena had already filed motions that would prevent those sales. What he didn't know was that his wife had stopped being a victim and become a strategist. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was flushed, my hands shaking with suppressed fury. "Just a little longer," I whispered to my reflection. Just hold on a little longer. The breaking point came sooner than expected. 3 days after that dinner conversation, I received a call from Elena. "We need to move now," she said, her voice urgent. "He's scheduled to close on selling 6 properties tomorrow morning. If we don't act immediately, those sales will go through, and recovering that money will be exponentially harder." My stomach dropped. 6 properties, not 5. He'd lied, even in what he'd told me. Or maybe he'd always planned to sell 6 and was testing to see if I'd question it. Either way, time was up. That afternoon, while Marcus was at his office, I packed a bag and left. Not dramatically, not with slammed doors or final confrontations, but quietly, methodically. I took only what I absolutely needed: clothes, documents, photographs of Aunt Clara, my laptop. I left my wedding ring on the dresser with a note that said simply, "Talk to your lawyer." Then I drove to Linda's house, where I'd been staying since this all started, and waited for the storm I knew was coming. The storm hit around 6 that evening. My phone exploded with calls and texts. At first, they were confused. "Where are you? Are you okay?" Then, as he realized what was happening, the messages turned angry. "What the fuck did you do? Call me right now." Then, manipulative. "Honey, I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? Please come home so we can talk." I didn't respond to any of them. I just forwarded them all to Elena as additional evidence of his controlling behavior. The next morning we went to court. Elena had filed emergency motions to freeze all accounts associated with my properties, to prevent any sales or transfers, and to revoke Marcus's access to my assets. We also filed for legal separation and requested a restraining order based on financial abuse. Walking into that courtroom, seeing Marcus across the room with his lawyer, his face a mask of shock and rage, I felt nothing. No sadness, no regret, not even satisfaction. Just cold, clear certainty that I was doing the right thing. The hearing was brief but brutal. Elena presented the evidence we'd gathered: recordings of his manipulation, documents showing unauthorized sales and loans, forensic accounting reports tracing where my rental income had gone. Marcus's lawyer tried to argue that everything was legal, that I'd signed the trust documents willingly, that this was just a bitter wife trying to punish her husband. But the judge wasn't buying it. She'd seen enough financial abuse cases to recognize one when she saw it. "Mr. Patterson," the judge said, her voice sharp as glass, "the evidence suggests you've systematically defrauded your wife, exploiting her grief and trust to access assets that were solely hers. I'm granting the emergency motions. All accounts are frozen, all sales are stayed pending investigation, and you are prohibited from accessing or disposing of any assets connected to the properties in question. Furthermore, I'm ordering you to stay at least 500 feet away from Mrs. Patterson. We'll reconvene in 30 days for a full hearing." I watched Marcus's face as the judge spoke, watched his composure crack, watched the mask slip to reveal the fury underneath. For just a moment, his eyes met mine, and what I saw there terrified me. Not anger exactly, but cold calculation. He was already planning his next move, already figuring out how to spin this, how to regain control. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Leaving the courthouse, Elena pulled me aside. "You need to be careful. Men like him don't take losing well. He's lost access to significant money, and that's going to make him desperate. Make sure you're staying somewhere safe, that you're not alone, that you vary your routines. I've seen situations like this escalate." Her warning sent chills down my spine, but I nodded. I'd come this far. I wasn't going to let fear stop me now. The next few weeks were surreal. I stayed at Linda's, barely leaving except for meetings with Elena and sessions with Sister Margaret. Marcus tried everything to reach me. He showed up at the school where I used to teach, somehow forgetting I'd quit. He called Linda's house from different numbers until she blocked them all. He even tried to approach me at church, but Sister Margaret intervened, reminding him of the restraining order. Each attempt felt like a violation, proof that he'd never respected my boundaries, my autonomy, my right to exist separate from him. Through it all, the legal machinery ground forward. Forensic accountants uncovered the full extent of Marcus's theft. Over $800,000 in unauthorized property sales, another $300,000 in fraudulent loans, and years of rental income diverted to his personal accounts. It was staggering, criminal, and exactly what we needed to make our case ironclad. Elena filed additional motions, including one requesting criminal charges for fraud and forgery. But here's where the story takes a turn that still makes me angry. Despite overwhelming evidence, despite documented fraud, despite everything we'd proven, the district attorney declined to press criminal charges. They said it was a civil matter, that because we were married, proving criminal intent would be difficult, that their resources were better spent on cases with clearer parameters. Translation: my suffering wasn't worth their time. I sat in Elena's office, stunned, as she delivered this news. So he just gets away with it? I asked, my voice cracking. He steals nearly $1 million from me, and there are no consequences? Not no consequences, Elena corrected gently. Civil consequences. We're going to sue him for every penny, plus damages. We're going to make sure he never profits from what he did. But criminally. Yeah, he's getting away with it. And I'm sorry. It's not fair and it's not right, but it's the reality of how these systems handle financial abuse, especially when it occurs within marriage. The injustice of it burned in my chest like acid. I'd done everything right. I'd documented. I'd gathered evidence. I'd followed every rule, and the system still failed me. Marcus would never see the inside of a jail cell. He'd never have a criminal record. To the world, he'd just be a guy who had a messy divorce, not a thief, not an abuser, not a manipulator. The unfairness of it made me want to scream. But as I sat with that fury, something else emerged. A realization that the criminal justice system's validation wasn't what I needed. I didn't need the state to tell me I'd been wronged. I already knew that. I didn't need Marcus to be punished by external forces. I needed to reclaim what was mine and rebuild my life. The peace I needed wasn't going to come from watching him suffer. It was going to come from my own healing and reconstruction. Still, I needed to confront him one more time. Not in court, not through lawyers, but face to face. I needed to look him in the eye and tell him exactly what he'd done, how he'd destroyed trust and love and everything that should have been sacred. Elena advised against it, said it was risky and legally unnecessary. But this wasn't about the law. This was about me, about closure, about not letting him have the last word in our story. So I arranged to meet him at our house, the one we'd shared, the one that now felt like a crime scene. I brought Linda with me for safety, along with my lawyer and a recording device. Marcus arrived looking haggard, older than I'd ever seen him. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy. Part of me remembered the man I'd thought I married. But then I looked at his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, and I remembered who he really was. We sat in the living room, where we'd once watched movies and made plans for the future. The irony wasn't lost on me. I wanted to talk to you, I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Because I need you to understand something. What you did to me wasn't just theft. It was a betrayal so profound that I don't think you even comprehend it. You took my grief over losing Aunt Clara and weaponized it. You took my trust and exploited it. You took my autonomy and systematically dismantled it until I didn't recognize myself anymore. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, probably with some explanation or justification, but I held up my hand. I'm not done. I'm going to say what I need to say, and you're going to listen. For once in our marriage, you're going to hear me without interruption, without redirection, without telling me what I really mean. He closed his mouth, and I continued. You saw me vulnerable and grieving, and instead of supporting me, you saw an opportunity. 26 properties. That's what you saw when you looked at me at that dinner, at my aunt's funeral reception. Not your grieving wife. $. And you pursued it with the same intensity you once used to pursue me, Except this time the manipulation was about money instead of love. Or maybe it was always about money. I don't know anymore. Maybe I never knew you at all. I paused, watching his face, looking for remorse, for shame, for anything human. But there was nothing. Just that same cold calculation, like he was already working out how to spin this conversation to his advantage. And in that moment, I knew. He would never apologize. He would never take responsibility. He would never acknowledge the harm he'd done. Because to him, I wasn't a person. I was a resource he'd failed to fully exploit. The thing is, I continued, my voice dropping to almost a whisper, I'm done caring what you think or say or feel. I spent months losing myself in your version of reality, doubting my own mind, questioning my own worth. But I found my way back. Sister Margaret helped me see that I wasn't powerless, just scared. And she was right. You only had the power I gave you, and I'm taking it all back. This isn't about the money, Marcus finally spoke, his voice smooth, practiced. I was protecting us, building our future. Everything I did was for our security. You're just angry and not thinking clearly. There it was, the manipulation I'd heard so many times, the reframing of theft as protection, of control as care. A few months ago, it would have worked. I would have doubted myself, wondered if maybe he was right. Maybe I was being emotional. But now? Now I could hear it for what it was. Gaslighting. Pure and simple. No, I said firmly. You were stealing from me. And the fact that you can't even admit it now, that you're still trying to manipulate me, tells me everything I need to know. You're never going to change. You're never going to take responsibility. And that's okay, because I'm not waiting for your redemption. I'm moving forward without you. I stood up, ready to leave, but then I remembered something Sister Margaret had told me. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is speak the truth plainly, without anger or emotion. Just state what happened and walk away. So I turned back to Marcus one last time. You stole $800,000 from property sales. You took out fraudulent loans for $300,000 more. You diverted years of rental income. You forged my signature. You committed fraud. Those are facts, not feelings. The court has frozen your access to my assets. Elena is pursuing civil charges that will cost you far more than you stole. And I'm filing for divorce. These are the consequences of your choices. Not my choices, yours. His face finally showed emotion then, rage, raw and undisguised. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice tight. You think you can manage those properties alone? You think you're smart enough to navigate that world. You need me. And there it was, the core belief that had allowed him to justify everything. He genuinely believed I was incompetent, that I needed him, that I couldn't survive without his guidance. The condescension was breathtaking in its audacity. But instead of arguing, instead of trying to prove my competence, I just smiled. I guess we'll find out, I said. Then I walked out of that house and didn't look back. The divorce proceedings dragged on for months. Marcus fought every motion, contested every claim, dragged his feet on every document. But eventually the law ground forward and justice of a sort was served. The court ruled that all properties should be returned to my sole ownership, that Marcus had to repay every dollar he'd stolen plus interest, and that he'd be liable for my legal fees. It wasn't criminal justice. He wasn't going to jail, but it was something. When the final papers were signed, when my name alone appeared on all 26 properties again, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't fully realized I'd been carrying. These weren't just properties. They were Aunt Clara's legacy, yes, but they were also proof that I'd fought back, that I'd reclaimed what was mine, that manipulation and theft hadn't won. I'd won. Not by destroying Marcus, but by refusing to stay destroyed. Do you think that was fair? That's the question that haunts me sometimes. He stole from me, abused me, manipulated me for months, and his only punishment was losing access to money that was never his to begin with. No jail time, no criminal record, Nothing that would follow him or prevent him from doing this to someone else. Is that justice? I honestly don't know. Part of me wants to scream that it's not enough, that he should suffer more, that the system should have protected me better. But another part of me, the part that's been healing and growing and learning to trust myself again, that part knows something important. My peace couldn't come from watching him suffer. It had to come from reclaiming my own life, my own power, my own sense of self. And in that regard, I won completely. He no longer has any control over me, any access to me, any power to make me doubt myself. That's a victory he can never take away. So what would you have done in my place? Would you have fought harder for criminal charges? Would you have been satisfied with civil remedies? Would you have confronted him at all, or just walked away quietly? I want to know. Tell me in the comments. Because these stories, these experiences, they're not just mine. They're happening to someone you know, maybe even to you. And the more we talk about them, the less power manipulators have. I want to share something I learned through all of this, something I wish I'd known before I signed away my inheritance. The cost of silence in these situations is devastating. When I stayed quiet about Marcus's control, when I made excuses for his behavior to my friends, when I isolated myself to avoid questions, I was enabling the abuse. Not causing it, that's all on him, but enabling it to continue unchallenged. Research shows that silence around financial abuse and manipulation allows it to thrive. When victims don't speak up, often out of shame or fear or confusion, abusers can continue their patterns undetected. They move from one victim to another, refining their tactics, becoming more skilled at manipulation. Speaking out breaks that cycle. It warns others. It creates accountability. It reminds us that these experiences aren't unique or shameful. They're patterns that need to be recognized and stopped. I've learned that talking about financial abuse in particular is crucial because it's so often invisible. There are no bruises, no dramatic emergency room visits, no obvious signs to concerned friends. It happens in the privacy of bank accounts and property deeds and supposedly mutual financial decisions. By the time the victim realizes what's happening, the damage is often severe and difficult to undo. That's why education is so critical. People need to know what to look for, both in their own relationships and in the relationships of people they care about. Here are some warning signs I wish I'd recognized earlier. If someone is systematically taking control of your finances under the guise of helping you, that's a red flag. If you find yourself asking permission for purchases you used to make freely, that's a red flag. If financial decisions are being made without your input or consent, that's a red flag. If you can't access your own accounts or are being told you don't need to worry about money matters, that's a red flag. If you notice assets disappearing or being transferred without clear explanation, that's a red flag. None of these signs alone necessarily indicate abuse. Sometimes people genuinely do need help managing finances, and sometimes couples do decide to divide financial responsibilities. The key is consent, transparency, and maintaining your own autonomy. You should always have access to information about your own assets. You should always have a voice in major financial decisions. You should never feel afraid to ask questions or request documentation. The moment those things become difficult or impossible, you're in dangerous territory. I also want to address something specific about my situation: the vulnerability that comes with inheritance. When someone receives a significant inheritance, especially after losing a loved one, they're in an incredibly vulnerable position. They're grieving, often confused about financial matters they've never had to handle before, and desperate for support. That's when predators strike. They see the vulnerability and the money, and they make their move. It's calculated, deliberate, and devastatingly effective. If you've recently inherited assets, please be cautious about who you trust with that information and who you allow to help you manage them. Get independent legal and financial advice before making any major decisions. Don't sign anything you don't fully understand, no matter who's pressuring you or how much they claim to have your best interests at heart. Take your time. Real support will wait for you to be ready. Real love won't rush you or make you feel incompetent. Anyone who tries to fast-track your decision-making or makes you feel stupid for asking questions is not acting in your best interest. Another crucial lesson: document everything. I can't stress this enough. If you're in a situation where you're feeling controlled or manipulated, start keeping records. Save texts and emails. Record conversations if it's legal in your state. Keep a journal with dates and specifics of concerning interactions. Take photos of documents. Create backups of everything in multiple locations. This documentation serves two purposes. It provides evidence if you need to take legal action, and it helps you maintain clarity about what's actually happening when someone is trying to convince you that you're remembering wrong or overreacting. I kept recordings of my conversations with Marcus, and while listening to them was painful, they were invaluable for both my legal case and my own healing. When he tried to claim he'd never said something, I could go back and listen to his exact words. When I doubted my own memory of how controlling he'd been, I had proof. Those recordings were my anchor to reality when he was trying to make me doubt it. They were uncomfortable to create. They felt like betrayal at the time, but they saved me in the end. Also, if you're experiencing this, reach out for help. I was lucky to have Linda and Sister Margaret, but there are resources everywhere. Domestic violence hotlines can help with financial abuse, even if there's no physical violence. Legal aid societies can provide guidance. Therapists who specialize in abuse can help you process what's happening and plan your exit. Financial advisors can help you understand and protect your assets. You don't have to navigate this alone, and you shouldn't. Isolation is one of the abuser's most powerful tools. Breaking that isolation is one of your most powerful countermoves. One thing I wish I'd known earlier: financial abuse is domestic violence. I didn't think of myself as a victim of domestic violence because Marcus never hit me. He never threatened physical harm. But financial abuse is a form of domestic violence. It's recognized as such by experts and advocacy organizations, and it deserves the same level of concern and intervention. If you're being financially controlled, manipulated, or exploited by an intimate partner, you are experiencing domestic violence, and you deserve support and resources. The statistics around this are sobering. Studies show that 98% of domestic violence cases involve some form of financial abuse. 98%. It's not a side effect or occasional tactic. It's central to how abusers maintain control. They cut off access to money, sabotage employment, ruin credit, steal assets, create debt in their victim's name, all to make leaving impossible. Financial independence is freedom, and abusers know that, which is why they work so hard to destroy it. I also learned that recovery from financial abuse is possible, but it takes time and support. After everything settled legally, I had to learn how to trust myself again, how to make financial decisions without second-guessing every choice, how to feel secure managing my own assets. I worked with a financial advisor who specialized in helping abuse survivors, and slowly I rebuilt my confidence. I learned about my properties, about real estate management, about investment strategies. I proved to myself that Marcus had been wrong, I was capable, I could handle complexity, I didn't need him. Today, I manage all 26 properties myself, with help from a good property management company and the financial advisor I trust. The rental income supports me comfortably, and I've even expanded, purchasing 2 more properties with the knowledge and confidence I've gained. Aunt Clara would be proud, I think. Not just that I kept her legacy, but that I fought for it, that I refused to let it be stolen, that I honored her strength by finding my own. But the financial recovery is only part of the healing. The emotional and psychological recovery is ongoing. I still have moments of doubt. Times when I hear Marcus's voice in my head telling me I'm not capable, that I'm being emotional, that I'm overreacting. Those voices are quieter now, but they haven't disappeared completely. I work with a therapist to process the trauma, to rebuild my sense of self, to learn what healthy relationships look like so I don't repeat these patterns. I've also had to grieve the marriage I thought I had, the man I thought Marcus was. That grief is complicated because it's mourning something that never actually existed. I was in love with a mask, a performance, a carefully crafted illusion. The real Marcus was always the manipulator, the thief, the man who saw me as an opportunity. Accepting that is painful, but necessary. I can't heal from something I'm still denying or minimizing. One unexpected part of my healing has been sharing my story. At first, I was ashamed, didn't want anyone to know how thoroughly I'd been fooled, how much I'd lost before I fought back. But Sister Margaret encouraged me to speak at a support group for abuse survivors, and something shifted when I did. Other women recognized their own experiences in my story. They felt less alone. And I felt less alone too. There's power in shared experience, in knowing you're not the only one who's been manipulated, who's doubted yourself, who's had to fight to reclaim your life. That's partly why I'm sharing this story now, in this format, with all of you listening. Because somewhere out there, someone is living through what I lived through. Someone is doubting their own reality, signing documents they don't understand, giving up their autonomy piece by piece. And maybe, if they hear my story, they'll recognize their own situation sooner than I did. Maybe they'll document the abuse. Maybe they'll reach out for help. Maybe they'll fight back before they lose everything. If that's you, if you're listening and recognizing yourself in this story, please know you're not crazy. You're not overreacting. You're not being too sensitive or too emotional. What's happening to you is real. It's wrong, and it's not your fault. You deserve autonomy, respect, and control over your own life and assets, and you can get that back. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but it's possible. I'm living proof. I also want to say something to those of you who aren't experiencing this yourselves, but know someone who might be. Please, don't dismiss their concerns or tell them they're overreacting. Don't suggest they're just having normal relationship problems or that all couples fight about money. Financial abuse and manipulation are real, serious, and devastating. If someone is confiding in you about concerning behavior from their partner, believe them. Help them document what's happening. Connect them with resources. Offer support without judgment. You might be the lifeline they need to escape. Looking back now, from the other side of this experience, I can see how many opportunities there were for intervention. Friends who noticed I'd changed, but didn't press when I made excuses. Family members who thought Marcus seemed controlling, but didn't want to interfere in my marriage. Colleagues who saw me become isolated, but assumed it was just the normal drift of life. Everyone was being polite, respectful of boundaries, not wanting to overstep. But sometimes love means overstepping, means asking uncomfortable questions, means refusing to accept easy explanations. If you see someone you care about becoming isolated, giving up their autonomy, making questionable financial decisions under the influence of a new partner, say something. Ask direct questions. Offer specific help. Don't let politeness or fear of awkwardness prevent you from potentially saving someone from years of abuse. Yes, you might be wrong. Yes, it might be uncomfortable. But you might also be the person who helps them see what they can't see themselves, who gives them permission to question what they're being told to accept. I think often about that dinner where I first mentioned the 26 properties, about Marcus's face when I said the number out loud. I wonder what would have happened if I'd noticed his reaction then, if I'd questioned it, if I'd been less grief-stricken and more alert. But I also know that's not fair to myself. I was grieving. I was vulnerable. I wanted to believe my husband loved me and wanted to help. Those are normal human responses to loss and change. The problem wasn't my vulnerability. The problem was Marcus's decision to exploit it. That's something I want to emphasize. If you've been manipulated or abused, it's not because you're stupid or weak or gullible. It's because someone you trusted made a calculated decision to exploit your trust. Abusers are often charismatic, intelligent, and skilled at manipulation. They're good at what they do because they've practiced, because they've refined their tactics over years, often across multiple victims. You're not the first person they've fooled, and unfortunately, you probably won't be the last. But that's not on you. That's on them. I've learned to extend my self-compassion for the choices I made while under Marcus's influence. I signed documents I shouldn't have signed. I isolated myself from friends who could have helped. I doubted my own perceptions and instincts. But I was doing the best I could with the information and emotional state I had at the time. I can acknowledge the mistakes without drowning in shame about them. That balance between accountability and self-compassion is crucial for healing. Another important lesson: healing isn't linear. There are days when I feel strong and confident and grateful for how far I've come. And there are days when I'm angry all over again, when I can't believe I let this happen, when I'm terrified about trusting anyone ever again. Both responses are valid. Recovery from abuse isn't a straight line from victim to survivor to thriver. It's a messy, complicated journey with advances and setbacks, good days and hard days. And that's okay. That's normal. Progress isn't perfection. I've also had to learn how to be alone without being lonely. For so long, my identity was wrapped up in being Marcus's wife, in the relationship I thought we had. When that ended, I had to figure out who I was on my own. It's been both liberating and terrifying. I've discovered interests I'd forgotten I had, reconnected with old friends, pursued hobbies Marcus had subtly discouraged. I've learned that I actually like my own company, that solitude can be peaceful rather than frightening, that I don't need a partner to feel complete. That said, I'd be lying if I said I never want another relationship. I do. Eventually. But I'm taking my time, learning to trust my instincts again, working through the trauma so I don't carry it into future relationships. I deserve a partner who respects my autonomy, who celebrates my competence rather than undermining it, who sees my assets as mine rather than ours to exploit. And I won't settle for less, no matter how long it takes to find that, or even if I never do. Being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who makes you disappear. I want to end by circling back to something Sister Margaret told me early in my healing journey. The opposite of abuse isn't just safety, it's freedom. That's what I found on the other side of this experience. Not just safety from Marcus's manipulation, but freedom. Freedom to make my own decisions, manage my own money, trust my own perceptions, live my own life. Freedom to make mistakes without being told I'm incompetent. Freedom to succeed without having that success stolen or diminished. Freedom to simply exist as myself, without constantly adapting to someone else's needs and demands. That freedom is what I fought for, and it's what I won. Not through the criminal justice system, which failed me. Not through revenge, which would have left me bitter and stuck. But through the hard work of documentation, legal action, therapy, and rebuilding. Through refusing to stay a victim, refusing to let Marcus define my story, refusing to let shame and fear keep me silent. That freedom is my victory, and it's worth more than all 26 properties combined. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. I know it was long and heavy and uncomfortable at times, but these are the stories we need to tell, the ones that might save someone else from similar experiences. I hope that if you found yourself in my story, you now have information and courage you didn't have before. And if you didn't, I hope you now have tools to recognize and help someone who is experiencing financial abuse or manipulation. I'm curious, where are you listening from? What time is it there? Are you at home, commuting, working? I love imagining all of you in your different spaces, taking time out of your day to hear my story. If this resonated with you in any way, if you found value in what I shared, please consider giving this video a like. It helps more people find these important stories, and I really do want to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done in my place? Did I make the right choices? Should I have pushed harder for criminal charges? Was I too trusting at the beginning? Or am I being too hard on myself about that? Your perspectives matter, and this conversation doesn't end with my story. It continues in the community we build around shared experiences and mutual support. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like this, Stories of betrayal and survival and transformation. Stories that might just change your perspective, or save your life, or help someone you love. Every subscription helps us reach more people who need to hear these messages. Before you go, I want to recommend 2 other videos that relate to this story. The first is about recognizing manipulation tactics in relationships, and the second is about financial recovery after divorce. Both offer practical information that complements what I've shared here. You'll find links to those in the description below. Finally, just a reminder. If you're in an abusive situation, whether financial, emotional, physical, or all of the above, there are resources available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-7-997-233. They can help with all forms of abuse, not just physical violence. You can also text START to 88788. You don't have to stay trapped. You don't have to face this alone. Help is available. Until the next story, take care of your hearts, trust your instincts, and remember, you are stronger than you know, smarter than you've been told, and deserving of relationships that honor your full humanity. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.